Cape Town is known for its mountain, its beaches, its vineyards stretching toward the horizon. Tourists photograph the colorful houses of Beau Carp. The Atlantic seaboard is lined with restaurants where the ocean meets the city. But behind those postcard images is a different Cape Town, a city where more than 2,800 people were murdered in a single year, a city where organized crime is not a shadow industry, it is a parallel economy, a city where gang leaders operate from prison cells as comfortably as businessmen from boardrooms. Some of these stories ended with convictions, others ended with bodies that were never found, and some have not ended at all. This documentary focuses on the victims, the evidence, and the legal outcomes, not on glorifying the people accused of these crimes. Today, we examine the underworld that has shaped Cape Town for generations, from the prison gangs born under apartheid to the modern kingpins who turned the mother city into a battlefield. To understand Cape Town's underworld, you have to start inside its prisons. The Numbers Gang, the 26s, the 27s, and the 28s was not born on the streets. It was born inside Pollsmoor Prison, and before that, inside the brutal prison system of apartheid South Africa. Men who entered the system as petty criminals emerged as soldiers in a structured criminal army with its own laws, its own ranks, and its own mythology. The legend traces back to a man named Nongoloza, a figure who, whether real or constructed, became the spiritual father of the 28s. The gang's internal code, passed down through generations of inmates, dictates everything: how members speak, how they dress, how they conduct business, and how they punish those who break the rules. What makes the Numbers Gang different from street gangs is its reach. A 28th general serving a life sentence in Pollsmoor can order a hit in Manenberg. A 27's captain can control drug distribution in Mitchell's Plain without ever leaving his cell. The prison walls do not contain the gang's authority, they concentrate it. By the 1990s, the Numbers Gang had evolved from a prison fraternity into something far more dangerous, the backbone of Cape Town's drug trade. Street gangs like the Hard Livings, the Americans, and the Sexy Boys fought for territory in the Cape Flats. But above them, often invisible, were the prison gang structures that supplied the drugs, settled the disputes, and collected the profits. The victims were not numbers. They were children caught in crossfire on their way to school. They were parents who sent their sons to prison for minor offenses and received them back as trained gang members. They were communities that learned to live with violence, the way other communities learn to live with traffic noise, as a permanent, unremarkable feature of daily life. If the Numbers Gang is the invisible architecture of Cape Town's underworld, the street gangs are its visible violence. The Sexy Boys were founded in the 1980s in the Cape Flats. The name itself is a misdirection, a label that sounds trivial, attached to an organization responsible for decades of territorial warfare. Their founder, Jerome Boyson, known on the streets as Donkey, built an empire that stretched from drug trafficking to protection rackets to legitimate businesses that served as fronts. Boyson was convicted of murder and sentenced to prison. But as is so often the case in Cape Town's underworld, an arrest is not the same as an end. His brother Colin Boyson stepped into the leadership vacuum. The gang's operations continued. The territory was defended. The cycle did not break. The Cape Flats, sprawling townships like Manenberg, Hanover Park, and Mitchell's Plain, became the front lines. Gang boundaries were drawn block by block. A young man born on one street belonged to one gang by default. Crossing into the wrong neighborhood could mean a death sentence. What makes this geography of violence so difficult to dismantle is that it is not random. It is organized. Every corner, every alleyway, every block of government housing has been mapped onto a criminal economy. The gangs do not just control the drug trade, they control access to jobs. They control who can walk on which pavement. In some areas, they control who receives government housing and who does not. A conviction may establish responsibility, but it cannot restore a child to his family. It cannot rebuild a community that has spent decades learning to fear its own streets. In the last decade, Cape Town's underworld evolved again. The street gangs of the Cape Flats did not disappear, but alongside them, a new class of criminal entrepreneur emerged. Men who operated not from prison cells or township corners, but from nightclubs, construction companies, and security firms. Mark Liffman was one of these figures. A businessman with interests in hospitality and property, Liffman was publicly known as a nightclub owner. Privately, law enforcement alleged he was something far more significant, a central figure in Cape Town's organized crime landscape, with connections that reached from the Western Cape to Johannesburg and beyond. In November 2024, Liffman was assassinated in broad daylight outside a shopping center in George, a town 4 hours from Cape Town. He was sitting in his vehicle when a gunman approached and fired multiple shots. The killing was not random. It was not impulsive. It was a message. And it was not an isolated event. The war between Liffman and another alleged underworld figure, Nafiz Modak, had been escalating for years. Modak, who rose from running a modest car wash business, became one of the most significant figures in Cape Town's criminal justice headlines, accused of everything from nightclub takeovers to the assassination of top police investigator Charles Kinnear. Kinnear, a lieutenant colonel in the anti-gang unit, was gunned down outside his home in Bishop Lavis in September 2020. A police officer investigating organized crime was murdered on his doorstep. That fact alone tells you what Cape Town's underworld became willing to do. The Modak trial, ongoing at the time of this documentary, involves more than 100 charges. The witness lists stretch across provinces. The allegations connect the drug trade, the nightclub industry, the security sector, and the killing of a policeman. But that did not answer every question. Who fills the vacuum when a kingpin falls? What happens when the next figure steps forward and the next trial begins? There is one more layer to Cape Town's underworld, one that affects not just the Cape Flats, but every commuter in the city. The minibus taxi industry in South Africa transports millions of people every day. In Cape Town, it is a multi-billion rand industry, and for decades, it has been a battleground. Taxi associations compete for routes the way gangs compete for territory. The difference is that taxi violence happens on roads the public uses every morning. Commuters have been caught in the crossfire. Taxi ranks have become crime scenes. Association leaders have been gunned down in drive-by shootings that mirror the tactics of the drug trade. The line between the taxi industry and organized crime is not always clear. Some gang figures have moved into the taxi business as a way to launder money. Some taxi associations have adopted gang-style enforcement. The question of who controls which route is not settled in boardrooms. It is settled with violence. What happens when a community stops believing that the law can protect it? It learns to survive. And survival, in Cape Town's underworld, often means silence. Cape Town's underworld is not one story. It is layers of stories, stacked across generations. The prison gangs that built a criminal code, the street gangs that carved up the flats, the kingpins who moved from alleyways to boardrooms, and the taxi wars that brought the violence onto public roads. Each layer connects to the others. The 28th General in Polesmore supplies the street gang in Mannenberg. The street gang enforces the territory where the kingpin's drugs are sold. The kingpin launders the money through a taxi association that fights for routes with the same weapons. The details are disturbing, but remembering these cases matters. Behind every headline was a person with a family, a future, and people who expected them to come home. A conviction may establish responsibility, but it cannot restore what was lost. A police investigation may uncover the truth, but it cannot undo decades of institutional failure. A documentary may inform the public, but it cannot answer every question, including the most important one. When does it end?